Wyoming Territory, June 1882, the sun burned hot over the dusty stretch of land curling around the rail station at Rawlins. And when the train hissed to a stop, Odessa Lark stepped down with nothing but a carpetbag clutched to her chest and a letter crumpled in her pocket. She blinked against the grit, her face pale and tight. Her boots hit the platform like they did not belong there, because they did not. She was lost. The crowd scattered fast, cowhands collecting freight, women greeting husbands, a few men lighting cigars. Odessa stood still. She watched the train disappear down the iron track and felt her chest cave. No one had come for her. She stared down at the letter again, her uncle's stiff handwriting. "Come stay with us, Odessa, we'll see you right." But the address had been scratched out, replaced with nothing. Her telegram had gone unanswered. Now she was here and there was no one. A low voice cut through the noise. "You looking for someone?" She turned, blinked up into the sun, and saw him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dusty from the trail. A tan hat shaded his eyes. He held his gloves in one hand, his other resting on the side of his saddle horse. A flicker of concern moved across his face. She swallowed. "Yes, I was supposed to be met. My uncle lives here, or did. I do not know any more." The cowboy stepped closer, slow, like he knew not to spook a skittish colt. "What's his name?" Harvey Lark, his brows pulled in. "I know the name." He rubbed the back of his neck. "But I am sorry, he passed last month. Fever took him." Odessa's legs gave out. She dropped to the bench behind her like the wind had been knocked from her. "No," she whispered. "No, he wrote me. He said I could come." "I believe you," the cowboy said gently. "I am sorry." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back fast. Odessa had not cried in weeks. Not through the fire back in Illinois, not through the long train ride west. She was not about to now. Still, she looked lost, worn down, like a girl who had used up all her courage. The cowboy crouched beside her. "Name's Dawson Abbott. I run cattle west of here. Look, I do not know what your plans were, but you cannot stay at this station." She looked at him. "I have nowhere else." "I figured as much." He stood and held out his hand. "Come with me." She hesitated. "I got a cabin, small but clean. My sister used to stay out there before she married off. It is not much, but it is safe. You can rest a few nights, figure out your next step." Odessa looked at him. The wind caught her dark hair and lifted it off her shoulder. She was tired, so tired, but something in Dawson's face steadied her, something quiet and sure. She took his hand. They rode out in silence, her on his spare horse, following him along the ridge. The land stretched wide and golden. Antelope moved in the distance. The wind smelled like dust and sage. His cabin sat near a creek lined with cottonwoods. Modest, one room with a lean to shed out back and a corral with 2 horses. He helped her down, then went about tending to the animals like it was any other day. Odessa stood near the porch, arms crossed. He handed her a canteen. "You hungry?" She nodded. He made coffee and fried beans and cornbread. They ate on the porch, the last heat of the day sinking low, the sky turning orange and pink. "You do not talk much," Odessa said finally. "Nope." She looked sideways at him. "You always take in strangers." "Not usually." He glanced at her. "But you looked like you needed someone." She stared at her plate. "I did." They were quiet again, the kind that does not feel heavy, just calm. Later, he gave her the bed and took a blanket to the porch. She stood in the doorway. "You do not have to sleep out there, I know, but you are going to anyway." He smiled just a little. "Yes, ma'am." She watched him settle down with the stars above and the creek whispering nearby. The next morning, she woke before dawn. She folded the blanket, swept the cabin, fetched water. When Dawson came in from the barn, he stopped short. "You do not have to do all that." "I know," she said, echoing him. She stayed 3 days. On the 3rd morning, he brought in a saddlebag and set it on the table. "What is this?" "Clothes. My sister left some behind. Might fit you." Odessa touched the worn calico dress, the soft wool shawl. Her breath caught. "You have done too much. You have not asked for anything." She looked up at him. "Why are you being so kind?" Dawson's jaw worked. He stepped closer. His voice was low. "Because the minute I saw you on that platform, looking like the world had dropped out from under you, I knew I was not letting you go. You are not alone anymore." Odessa's eyes filled, but she did not look away. She stepped forward, close enough to feel his breath. I do not want to leave, she said. You do not have to. And then she was in his arms, her face pressed against his shirt, his hold firm and warm. He wrapped her up like he meant it, like he had been waiting for this. I got you, he whispered. I got you, Odessa. She held on tight. The days started to fall into rhythm. She cooked, he worked the land. He taught her how to ride better, how to mend a fence. She laughed once in the creek, and he had looked at her like it was the first sound of spring. One night, a storm rolled through. Thunder cracked the sky open. She ran to the porch, and he was there, pulling her inside. She clutched his arm. I hate thunder. His hand came up to her cheek. You are safe here. The storm raged outside. Inside, the air turned quiet, warm. She tilted her face up. Dawson? He leaned down before she could say more and kissed her. It was not rushed. It was steady. Sure, like him. She kissed him back, arms going around his neck, and he lifted her off the ground, carried her to the bed like she weighed nothing. They stayed close that night and every night after. By the end of the week, she was no longer a stranger, she was his, and he told her so, standing in the quiet of morning, holding her hand. I know it is quick, but I have never been more sure. Odessa, be mine. Stay, she looked up at him, eyes shining. I already am. The hayfield east of the creek rippled under the wind, gold and green in long swaths. Odessa knelt near the fence line, her skirts pinned above her ankles to keep from dragging in the damp grass. She had a willow basket beside her, half full with wild chamomile and yarrow. Dawson leaned against a post not far off, arms folded, watching her with the kind of quiet that meant he was thinking hard about something. He hadn't said much since the morning's ride, and when she caught his eyes now, it was like he hadn't meant to be caught. You'd say if you didn't like me out here, she said, brushing her palm along the top of the woven herbs. He shifted, pushed his hat back a little. I'd say if I didn't want you here. She stood, shaking her hand free of the tiny blooms. Then what's got you chewing rocks? There's a man in town, he said after a pause. Name's Lyle Bremen. He worked some land near your uncle's place, claims there's a lien on that property. Says your uncle owed him for feed and tools. Odessa's brow furrowed. I don't know anything about that. He's not talking about turning it over to you. He's talking like it's his now. She walked to the fence, placed her hands on the top rail. Did you believe him? I believe he wants it. That don't make it true. I have no deed, no paper. Dawson looked toward the horizon. I figured as much. Bremen's pushing, though, said he's riding out here tomorrow. She kept her jaw tight. I won't go back to Rawlins. You won't have to. He looked at her then, steady. But we might need to prove what's ours. Odessa blinked. Ours? He stepped close, voice low. I meant what I said. I'm not letting you go. She nodded, throat thick. Then I suppose we face him together. That evening, she boiled the flowers she'd gathered, poured the steeped water into a tin cup, and set it on the table beside Dawson's chair. He'd been oiling his saddle gear, movements careful, deliberate. Drink, she said. It'll settle your mind. He took the cup, sipped, and nodded. Tastes like the field smells. That's the point. The fire in the stove crackled, casting a soft light across the rough-hewn walls. He stayed seated while she moved about, folding linens, tucking away the last of the beans she'd cooked. When she finally sank into the chair across from him, their knees nearly touched. You ever think about leaving Wyoming? She asked, eyes on the knot in the floorboard between them. No. I've put down what roots I got. I hadn't meant to land here, but you did, she looked up. And now there's you, and a patch of land worth fighting for. She reached out, let her hand rest over his. The feel of his skin calloused, warm, sure settled something inside her. I want to know about your sister, she said. You don't speak of her much. She was younger. Braver than me, maybe. She married a tinsmith in Green River, had a boy last spring. She used to tend this place better than I did. If Bremen had come sniffing then, she'd have run him off with a broom. Odessa smiled faintly. She sounds like someone I'd like. She'd like you too. She had a way of understanding people fast. Is that where you get it? He didn't answer right away. When he did, it was soft. I try to see what's true in folks, that's all. She stood then, and he rose with her. They didn't speak again that night. He took her hand and led her out to the porch, where the stars were starting to burn low in the sky. They watched the wind bend the cottonwoods, and when he wrapped his arm around her waist, she leaned into him like she'd always known how. Morning came quiet, with pale light and the smell of dew. Dawson was already outside, splitting kindling when she stepped out the door. "We'll be ready," he said without turning. She nodded. "He's not taking anything from me." Dawson planted the axe in the stump. "I didn't think he would." The rider came late in the morning. Odessa stood at the edge of the corral, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, a pale thread of sweat along her neck from the work she'd been doing with the washboard. When she heard the hoofbeats, she straightened, brushing her hair from her brow with the back of her wrist. Dawson had already stepped out from the barn, rifle slung deliberate but easy over one shoulder. He didn't move to meet the man, just waited, letting the distance speak its own caution. The rider slowed his roan, gelding near the gate, and dismounted with a sharpness that didn't belong to a friendly visit. Gray dust clung high on his boots, and the set of his jaw showed no softness. "You Abbott?" the man asked, voice clipped. "I am," Dawson said. "That Bremen?" "Lyle Bremen." "And I'm here on business." Odessa stayed where she was, silent, watching. "I heard you've got a girl living here," Bremen said. "Harvey Lark's niece." "That's right." "Well, she's on land that don't belong to her. Harvey owed me for tools I fronted him. He promised payment in kind, and when he passed, that land became my collateral." Dawson's voice didn't change. "You got that in writing." Bremen's fingers tapped the saddle horn. "He wasn't the sort to waste time on signatures. Then you've got a story." "I've got a woman who's got no reason to trust it." Odessa stepped forward then, her voice clear. "My uncle never mentioned a debt, not once. I have every letter he sent. He said this land was his." "That don't make it true," Bremen said, glancing over his shoulder toward her. "It makes it as true as anything you've said," she replied. "Why now? Why not settle this while he was living?" Bremen didn't answer. He looked at Dawson again. "I've filed claim with the county clerk. I'll wait for the circuit judge to ride through next month. If I'm right, she'll be off this land come fall." Dawson nodded once. "Then I guess we'll wait for the law to say what's what." Bremen mounted again. "Don't get comfortable." Odessa didn't flinch. "I haven't been." When the dust settled behind the retreating horse, Dawson turned to her. "You sure you want to fight this?" She came to stand beside him. "I didn't come all this way to be pushed off a porch I helped sweep clean." He looked at her, long and quiet. "You'll have to testify if it comes to it. Might be rough." "I've done rough," she said. "This time I'll do it with someone beside me." They didn't speak again until dusk. She was on the porch, mending the hem of a quilt Dawson's sister had left behind. He came up the steps slow, carrying a bundle wrapped in canvas. "I've been thinking," he said, crouching beside her. "If Bremen's claim holds, we'll have to leave. I don't much like that, but I can live with it. What I can't do is lose you." She set down her work. "You won't." He unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a piece of cedar board carved smooth, with her name burned into the grain in careful script. "I was gonna wait, but now seems better." He set it in her lap. "I want to build us something that no man can take on paper or otherwise." Her fingers traced the letters. "You made this?" "I did." She looked up, eyes shining in the low light. "Then there's nothing left to wait for." They married 2 days later under the cottonwoods by the creek, with only the wind and the birds as witness. He wore his cleanest shirt. She wore her uncle's brooch pinned above her heart. They exchanged vows in plain words spoken with steady voices. That night she folded into him beneath the weight of a new life, not borrowed, not promised, built. "It's ours now," she whispered. Dawson kissed her temple. "Always was." The air shifted in August, less heat, more dust, dry as bone. Odessa stood knee-deep in the vegetable rows behind the cabin, wiping soil from her fingers onto her apron. The squash vines had taken well in the corner near the creek, and she could see the first pale blooms curling open. Dawson's voice called across the yard. "There's a letter come in." She straightened, turned toward the porch where he held a folded envelope, one edge torn from travel. She stepped out of the rows, brushing her hands clean on her skirt, and took it from him. "It's from Judge Harvin," he said, watching her fingers hesitate at the crease. "Rode into Green River last week. Bremen must have sent word early." Odessa opened the letter slowly, eyes scanning the thin handwriting. Her lips moved silently as she read, shoulders drawing tighter as she reached the last line. "Well?" Dawson asked. "He's willing to hear both sides," she said. He'll be at the Grange Hall come the second Saturday of September. Dawson nodded, his jaw slackening slightly. That gives us 4 weeks. She folded the letter neatly and tucked it inside the ledger book where they kept their accounts. We'll need to gather everything. Letters, receipts, anything with Uncle Harvey's hand on it. I'll ride into the clerk's office next week, see what's been filed. She turned to him. You think we stand a chance? I think the truth holds weight. And I think we're not the kind to quit. They spent the next days tucked into the corners of the cabin, sorting through the crate Dawson had found beneath the floorboards in the shed. Inside were ledgers inked in Harvey's stiff scrawl, a folded sheet from a Rawlins blacksmith, and a torn envelope with a receipt for fence wire. Odessa held each piece like it was a breath from the past, something delicate and half-faded but still hers. One evening, Dawson brought in a stack of worn paper from the barn. Found these in the old tack chest, looks like loan ledgers from the feed store. She sifted through them, stopping when she found a name. Here, this one's signed by Bremen. It's dated 3 winters ago. Uncle Harvey paid in full, Dawson exhaled. That's the kind of thing Harvin'll want to see. By the end of the week, a pile of evidence sat bundled in an oiled cloth, tied with twine and set on the shelf above the stove. Odessa rested her hand on it once, fingers lingering. Dawson watched her. You're still holding something back. She didn't answer right away. Then, without looking at him, she said, I dreamed last night I was back at the station, dust in my teeth, that feeling of not knowing where to go. He stepped to her. You never have to feel that way again. She looked up. I believe you, but parts of me still wake in the dark, wondering if this is real. He touched her waist, just enough to steady her. It's real, and it's ours. Next morning, Odessa rode out to the edge of the property where a stone marker stood beneath a lone pine. She knelt there, pulled a small braid of dried sweetgrass from her pocket, and laid it at the base of the stone. Thank you, she whispered. I'll hold on to what you left. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The silence around her held enough. When she returned, Dawson was at the forge, hammering a bent hinge back into shape. She stood near the door and waited until he noticed her. You always this patient? She asked. He looked up, sweat at his brow. Only with you. That night they sat on the porch again, the sun slipping low beyond the ridge. She rested her bare feet against the worn rail. He sat beside her, sharpening a skinning knife with long, steady strokes. You reckon you'll always be this quiet, she said suddenly. He didn't look up. You reckon you'll always talk that much, she laughed, and for the first time in days it didn't carry any weight. He set the knife down, leaned back in his chair. I was thinking, once this is settled we could build on, add a second room. Maybe even a lean-to with a stove proper. Odessa turned to him. You planning for winters already? I'm planning for a life. She studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the way his fingers never fidgeted. You ever see yourself as someone's husband? No, he said. But I see it now. She didn't answer, just reached for his hand and laced her fingers with his. The wind moved gentle through the cottonwoods, and the moon rose slow over the ridge. They sat like that until the stars came out. 2 people who'd found something worth holding, something that couldn't be taken by paper or claim. And when they rose to go inside, they moved together like they always had without needing to say a word. The Grange Hall stood 2 miles outside Green River, its whitewashed boards dulled by years of wind and sun. Odessa adjusted the pins in her hair as the wagon rolled to a stop beside the split-rail fence. Dawson tied the reins to a post, then helped her down with a hand that lingered just a moment longer than needed. Ready? He asked. She nodded, though her stomach pulled tight beneath her stays. I want this settled. Inside, the hall was cool and dim, lit by 2 wide paneled windows and a row of oil lamps suspended from the rafters. Judge Harvin sat near the front at a crude pine table, a pair of deputy clerks beside him. Lil Bremen leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, his hat hanging from one hand. Dawson and Odessa walked in together, their boots echoing hollow on the floorboards. They sat at the bench opposite Bremen, the bundle of documents wrapped tight between them. Harvin didn't waste time. Mr. Bremen, you claim the late Harvey Lark owed you for materials and labor? I do, Bremen said. Paid out of pocket for feed, hardware, even helped fence the east slope. We had an understanding. Odessa opened the bundle and passed the first page forward. My uncle's ledgers show payment to you 3 winters ago, in full. Harvin adjusted his spectacles and squinted at the paper. This your uncle's handwriting? It is. I have 5 letters from him here in the same hand. Dawson passed them forward without a word. Harvin skimmed them slowly, then tapped the edge of the bench with 2 fingers. Bremen, did you ever file a lien? No, sir, but did you hold any note of debt? Signed agreement? There wasn't need, Bremen said, his jaw tightening. He gave his word. Harvin set the letters down. A man's word counts for something, but so do records, and these show your debt was cleared. Bremen's arms fell to his sides. They're lying. Harvin raised a brow. I see no reason to doubt their evidence. Bremen's gaze swung to Odessa. You don't deserve that land. You weren't even here. I'm here now, she said, and it's mine. Harvin looked between them, then picked up the final page, a copy of the county's registration from 2 years prior. And it appears Harvey Lark filed legal claim before his death. It stands. Dawson reached for Odessa's hand beneath the table. She squeezed his fingers hard, not from fear, but from the pressure of everything lifting at once. Harvin gave a nod. Disputes resolved. The land belongs to Miss Lark. Outside, the sky was cloudless. Odessa leaned against the wagon wheel, shaking slightly now that the moment had passed. Dawson stood beside her, arms folded, watching her like he could see the pieces inside her settling back into place. You did it, he said. We did it, she replied. I don't know if I'd have managed without you. You would have, he said, but I'm glad you didn't have to. They rode home slow, quiet, not the silence of worry, but of knowing, the kind of quiet that breathed easy between 2 people who'd seen the worst and come out standing. That night, she lit the lantern in the cabin and walked out to the porch with a tin cup of water in her hands. Dawson was on the steps, sharpening the same knife he'd used to carve her name into cedar. She sat beside him. I want to ask you something. He looked over, one brow raised. Do you want to marry me again, not just because of land or names or trouble, but because we want to? Dawson set the knife down on the porch boards. You already know my answer. Say it anyway. He turned to her fully. I want to marry you, Odessa Lark, not because I have to. Because I'd be a fool not to. She leaned forward and kissed him, slow and soft, her hand curling at his collar. Then let's do it proper. They married by Reverend Boyle under the same pine tree where Harvey's marker stood. This time, there were neighbors to witness Ellen and her boy from downriver, the Jensens from over the ridge. Odessa wore a pale blue dress sewn from calico Dawson had traded for in town. He wore the same shirt, but freshly pressed. Afterward, they served coffee and peach preserves on fresh cornbread. Ellen brought a small cake with wild berries layered between. The sun dropped low while they sat under the cottonwoods, laughter rising in warm pockets of air. When the last of the guests rode off, Odessa stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching Dawson pour water into the basin and wash the dust from his hands. I never thought I'd feel peace like this, she said. He looked over his shoulder. It's not just peace. It's home. She crossed the room, wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, her cheek pressed to his back. Home with you is all I ever wanted. Years passed quiet and full. The cabin was added onto in the spring that followed, just as Dawson had promised. A second room for Odessa's spinning and drying herbs, and later, a cradle tucked in the corner when their daughter came, a strong-willed girl with Odessa's dark hair and Dawson's steady eyes. They named her Clara after Dawson's sister, who came every summer with her boy to help harvest and laugh loud in the kitchen. Neighbors became friends. Land disputes faded into memory. Odessa taught Clara to read by candlelight, her voice even and warm. Dawson built her a swing from an old harness strap and hung it from the cottonwood out front. On winter nights, they sat by the stove while the wind howled outside, their hands always finding each other. They grew older, not with regret, but with the rhythm of seasons well lived. They never left that land, not once. There was no need. And when the sun rose each morning, it rose over a home built not from claim or paper, but from 2 people who had found one another in the wreckage of loss and stayed.